Hi, Oliver. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Good morning, Howard. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks. Bright and early for you, afternoon for us in the UK. How are you doing over there?
Yeah, it's good. Las Vegas is buzzing. We're gearing up for the Super Bowl in a couple of weeks' time. So, or this week. This week's the Super Bowl. So, the numbers are coming in. You can't get a restaurant.
Mhm.
Can't get a hotel room. It's a busy time for us.
Yeah, and actually, we'll talk about this later on, but obviously in Nevada at the moment, the gross gaming revenue numbers are just like through the roof the last few months, aren't they?
Yeah. We're over 13 billion. We broke new records last year, 2021, which was a surprise to some, but not really a surprise to me.
Hmm.
I'm a believer that there is a structural change that is taking place in Las Vegas just now, which I'm sure we'll get on to
Hmm.
later on in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the first time we're doing a GI Huddle with you, but just to plug the columns you do for us. You write for Gaming America, which is Gambling Insider's sister publication, and there's always in-depth stuff there on kind of some of the topics we'll discuss later, Las Vegas, certain properties. But to start off, kind of the questions for this interview, if you could kind of tell us a bit about yourself, just as an intro, and kind of how you ended up with your wonderful Scottish accent as a Nevada resident talking about Las Vegas casinos.
Well, here's the funny story: is that I'm not a journalist, right? Which sets me apart from other people who write things. My background is I'm actually a surveyor, so I
Hmm.
worked in UK in real estate development and investment for many years. But prior to that, when I turned 21, I came with my family out to Las Vegas in the 90s, in the days before you could fly direct from the UK to Las Vegas. My dad wanted to take me here. We came, had a wonderful time, stayed at the Mirage, and this place was like, oh my goodness, how did they do this? And you took a walk down the strip in '97, and you saw the Bellagio being built, Paris being built, Monte Carlo had just opened. A couple of years previous, New York had just opened. The place was like completely like a fantasy. The only thing I've ever seen like it was when I went to Macau during the Macau building boom
Hmm.
in around about 2009, 2010. But Las Vegas then seemed to be the most exciting place. And I said, I want to come and live in Las Vegas. And my dad says, no, you don't. It's not where middle class boys from Glasgow end up. And I thought nothing more about it. I continued doing real estate investment and development on pan European retail, UK residential, pretty much across the way. And after I did my master's in real estate investment finance, the university asked me to stay on and teach a class on strategic asset management. So I started teaching.
Hmm.
And then after the Great Recession, I said, if things, the UK real estate market went crazy, everything collapsed, and I decided to go and do an MBA. And while I did my MBA, the faculty said, you've got to do a thesis. So I thought, right, what am I interested in? I'm interested in the evolution of Las Vegas. I'm interested in the financing of the buildings. I'm interested in why some last longer than others. Some are demolished after 30 years, some last 60, 70 years. What is it that makes them achieve strategic competitive advantage? And that was my MBA thesis. So I
Hmm.
wrote it, and the UNLV published it. And the business school said to me, Oliver, would you like to teach a class on strategic competitive advantage? So I said, sure, but I want to bring students to Las Vegas. And they went, where? I said, no, Las Vegas. So about 450 students over the last, 10, 12 years have come from London through City University, Bayes Business School, which was Cass Business School,
Hmm.
to Las Vegas to study strategic competitive advantage in what is the most competitive city on earth. And that's kind of about 6 years ago. I was getting calls to come and do work in Las Vegas and to help with development because obviously I'm a surveyor and real estate development is what I do first and foremost. But to apply my theories into competitive advantage into the built environment. So I ended up coming over here and I've worked for the likes of Golden Entertainment, Caesars Entertainment on development strategy with their buildings. And I currently have a range of private clients from the UK that want to come to Las Vegas, or whether that's casino owners wanting to buy assets in here, or food and beverage operators in London and the UK that want to come into Las Vegas and enter this market because
Hmm.
it really is a market like no other.
Yeah. So in terms of that's kind of your journey. In terms of what you do now and day to day, I mean, is the latter part of your last answer the answer to that question, or could you tell us a little bit more about your current kind of projects and things like that?
Sure. So I really do three things, right? The first of which involves you guys. I write. And I research and write the history and evolution of Las Vegas, especially the business history. And there are fabulous historians in the history of Nevada and Las Vegas. Dr. Dave Schwartz at the UNLV, Michael Green is phenomenal about the history. But when I started writing my thesis, I noticed there was a dearth of information about the owners, the developers, and their business philosophies. So you read, there are books published on Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, but very little published from a critical and academic point of view on the likes of Steve Wynn, Sheldon Adelson, Kirk Kerkorian, Bill Bennett. And these people, their business philosophies and insights, especially related to customers, is really unique and very progressive into the world of building. So that's number one. Paired with that is teaching and academics. So again, when I write and research, I also teach as well, especially in the ways in the insights that we gain from a business environment. So let me give you an example. We see casinos, the outsider coming to Las Vegas sees this homogeneous place where we are selling the same product at the same time, in the same place, to the same people at the same price. Competitive advantage theory says you either have to differentiate or you have to become the price leader. And there are your two angles for competitive advantage. You can't sell a $10 game of blackjack at $8. A game of blackjack is more or less the same whether you play it at the Wynn or you play it at Circus Circus, which are two very different propositions in terms of environment. And secondly, if you become the price leader in terms of the non-gaming amenities, you're pretty soon the first out of business. So if you look at the old Imperial Palace, the Riviera, all these places beforehand were the effective price leaders, and it destroyed the value proposition because gaming or gambling is not a low value proposition. So the question is, how do you position that offering in the market to meet the needs of the customers? So that's the theory behind it, and I teach some of that. And the third thing I do again is business consultancy. And when we drill down deeper into what are the drivers of competitive advantage, you find that they are, number one is location, and number two is customer loyalty. And there are different types of customers, and there's different types of customer loyalty. So and part of that is players cards, but also a lot of it is physical environment design and development. So it's one thing to say, let us just take a building that exists in London and put it in Las Vegas. That doesn't necessarily mean that the customers are going to behave the same way in Las Vegas that they would behave in London. Because the competitive environment is different, and those needs, whether they be emotional or functional, are different in Las Vegas than what they are in other markets. So I advise on that element of development. And again, I also advise people who want to come to market. So let's say, for example, you are I'm trying to choose somebody who's not a client. Let's say you are a pizza restaurant and you want to come to Las Vegas. Where is the best property for you to go? Because the history of Las Vegas is littered with the corpses of bad decisions. I can think of phenomenal restaurants in other cities that have opened in the wrong location and closed within 6 months. That's not because the offering is bad, but it's because it doesn't align with the customer at that particular resort. So I use my real estate and leasing and positioning knowledge, because I obviously working in real estate for many years, to advise people to come to market in the most effective way.
Now that all sounds like you've definitely got plenty going on, definitely got your hands full. And when you talk about the history of Vegas, the point you just made there, how important is it when it comes to, well, it's obviously important when it comes to Vegas itself, but are there lessons that you can apply from the history of Vegas elsewhere? Or is it more like you said, that Vegas is very unique and that customers will behave differently in Vegas to other places in the world?
Well, they do. That we know. The history is really important because there really isn't very much that is new. If you think about what we do here, you still got customers coming from all over the world, coming to this market to play games of skill or games of chance. Now, the technology has changed, the environment has changed, the insights have changed, but fundamentally, the business positioning that existed 70 years ago is similar to the business positioning that we have now. Whereas it was Mo Dalitz in the 1950s, it was Steve Wynn in the 80s and 90s. Today, who is the next developer who is developing for our luxury customer? It's the same positioning, but different people. So we have to look back at what worked 50 years ago. Again, you go back to Jackie Gone in the 1950s and early 1960s. Downtown, he offered coupons and fun books. Those coupons and fun books then translated to points and players cards and discounts within the Caesars or the Harris model in the 90s, early 2000s. And then the next generation of that is, was coming up in, which I think I wrote about in a recent article with you guys, is what's next for gaming technology, players cards technology, and the likes of digital wallets. So how does your digital wallet engage with the environment that you're in and the personalization of the experience? Because that is, it is an iteration of that strategy that it started, 75, 80 years ago.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about the kind of future trends of Vegas later on. But based on a quick note on that for now, based on what you just said there in terms of the gaming proposition, the actual offering maybe hasn't changed so much. In another 50 to 100 years, are we essentially going to be looking at pretty much the same thing because the product itself, that's not what changes. It's as you say, kind of strategies, marketing, that kind of thing.
So the question I would say is, what is it that you're selling? Okay. And I think you're selling various things to meet the needs of your customers. So when you're selling gambling or gaming, you're selling risk to customers. So customers are buying risk at a price. So as long as you're selling something that customers want, they will buy it. And those games of chance, those games of skill that are embedded in the national psyches, will continue. The slot machines are far more embedded in the American psyche than they are perhaps in other countries. Let's go to Macau, for example. And, slot machines are a curiosity, rather than part of the cultural landscape. I mean, you look at early 1950s, mid 1950s US. You have Twilight Zone with the element of customers coming to Las Vegas and playing slot machines, and the chinging coins and the bars lining up as part of the national psyche and culture. You come here to win. Sports betting, which in the UK is ubiquitous. You walk down any high street, you've got a dozen sports betting. This is new to the US, and we are over here we're missing 60 years of development. We're going straight from land-based books in casinos right the way through to on your cell phone, digital gaming without that 60 years of history. When I tell people, you put on Radio 4 in the morning and you listen to the day program, which is the most highbrow news programs, they'll tell you the betting odds on the horse racing at 3 o'clock at Chepstow as part of the main news bulletin. We're not there yet, but over here. But in the UK, it is ingrained. Over here, it's still very much becoming part of the norm, very, very quickly.
You mentioned kind of obviously selling customers risk, and you mentioned Macau. How much more are you selling in Vegas the experience to the customer than in Macau? Because in Macau, it's very much gaming. It's very much we're there to win. But obviously Vegas, you have all. Jim Murren once told me, I think it was previously gaming revenue was 65% and non-gaming was 35%. Now it's probably switched more. A lot of revenue now is the things that are around gaming.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, to Jim's point, while as a percentage, gaming has not dropped. Gaming has increased significantly, since, over the last 10 years, gaming has gone up more or less, every year. It's the non-gaming amenities that have gone up because going back to my point, we are meeting the customer needs. And those customer needs here, whether it's a convention customer, where they need large spaces and good restaurants and big hotel rooms, we're meeting their functional needs. If it's an emotional need, we are meeting that here. Our buildings are designed to elicit emotional responses. If you walk into the Wynn, you feel good about yourself. If you feel good about yourself, you want to come back. So that is the fundamental point of that loyalty piece. If we make people feel good, they come back. If we give them things that they want to do, they will return. So when we talk about meeting customer needs, you have that transactional loyalty where you're perceived to be getting good value for something. You have an emotional connection to the physical environment that you're in. And we'll talk about that later on in terms of the evolution, because this is not an accident. It's not an accident that we decided to create these environments and porte-cocheres and designs and room sizes. It's an iterative process that started, with Caesar's Palace. Was codified in the Mirage, and then implemented in Bellagio and Wynn to a much higher level. So the idea of casino design is imperative in meeting those emotional needs of the customers, and that's the kind of thing which I bring to the table, because I also have that that strong financial development background. So you typically find that casinos themselves, if you go back to the analysis of casinos there in the 1970s by Venturi and those guys, casinos are marketing tools. The physical building of a casino is just a marketing tool to get your customer to go into here rather than there. That's really unlike any other large-scale real estate development, right? You don't, build an office to say, I'd rather be in that office than that office if they're similar looking. What the brand and the messaging is of Caesar's Palace is a distinct message compared to the brand and messaging of the Strat for different customers with different aspirations, with different needs. So that whole piece in terms of developing, the offering to meet the customer needs is consuming within the casino experience in a way that it isn't with other physical assets. That's kind of what brought me out of here as a real estate guy. It's this confluence between strategy, marketing, and finance to a degree, because the obviously the customers and the affluence and the spending of Wynn customers are going to be greater than the spending of Circus customers. But that said, the Circus customers have a lot less volatility than the Wynn customers. So Circus is a phenomenal asset.
If we're talking about casino design, kind of evolution of Las Vegas, let's talk a bit about the Mirage, which you just mentioned, because you've got an upcoming article in Gaming America about the Mirage. There's been some goings on there recently. I mean, generally, when it comes to Mirage, I know you've got some thoughts on the property.
Yeah. So for those that are unfamiliar, Hard Rock International have acquired the operating lease to the Mirage Casino Resort in Las Vegas. The Mirage, I think for me, is probably the most important casino ever built anywhere in the world. November the 22nd, 1989, the doors opened in Las Vegas and the gaming world changed. And, despite the fact it leans very heavily on Caesar's Palace and other parts of casino design, maybe the International, which was the Hilton at the time, the way that the Mirage came together, it was the first mega resort to open in Las Vegas with over 3,000 rooms at the same time. And whereas unlike in Caesar's Palace and Circus, which, by the way, when Caesar's opened, it had 680 rooms, and Circus didn't open with a hotel attached to it. But like those properties, it was a sense of escape. It took what was in Jay Sarno, the developer of both Circus and Caesar's Palace, had an intuitive understanding of customer psychology. And he said, that goes there and that goes there. What the Mirage did with Wynn and Joel Bergman and Paul Steelman and Roger Thomas and those guys was, how do we codify this? Why did Sarno set Caesar's Palace back from the Strip when the other properties were opening on the Strip? Why did he create oval-shaped spaces? Why was this there? They were the first people to codify it all down and build a property. So everything that you saw after that, whether it be the MGM Grand in 93 or Bellagio or Wynn or any other property, leans heavily on that codification that the Mirage put together. Now, not just in development and design, but also in casino operations and hiring techniques and labor relations. And when we talk about experiences, the Mirage was created specifically for people to love it. it was developed to elicit an emotional response as well as a functional response. So, for example, if you've been outside in the 90s, you'd smell that sense, that pina colada throughout the property, the bright colors. It was a sensory overload. Everything was done deliberately. The lighting was programmed at different times of the day. There was a quality to it that made you feel like you were on vacation, and people loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Caesar's was escapism, but it wasn't codified. It was almost by accident. Stan Mallon, who was Jay Sarno's partner, told me before he passed away, they captured lightning in a bottle, right? As if it were an accident. What Wynn and his team did was they deliberately did everything that they could to replicate the successes. How did you get that lightning in the bottle? Right, and they found the answers to that, which is why the Mirage is so prosperous over the years, and which is why people love it. And I think the response to its demise is felt all the more because people over the last 30-some years have developed an emotional attachment to that property. And because it is so important for those of us that analyze and study development and design, you're taking away the thing that everything else was based on. The Mirage now is very different from the Mirage of 30 years ago. The color palette's changed. A lot of people have moved on, but you walk around it and you can still see bits of how and why that customer journey was created, and then take people down to other properties, and you can see where that influence came from. So for me, as somebody who teaches this stuff, I take my students and I walk them around the Mirage and show them how things have iterated. And to lose that, for those of us, who study this thing, it's a great loss. I think Hard Rock would be fabulous. They're a great operator and a great brand, and they have a clear customer that they identify with. I just think it's a shame that the cost of them coming in is the loss of the Mirage.
Yeah, no, definitely. We've talked about kind of how Vegas has built up and the themes of its development, and you've talked about it quite a bit there. A question on tribal, as you say, Hard Rock is a big brand, a massive brand across the US. David Lopez, the CEO of AGS, once told me he in a couple of years he sees a tribal operator on the Strip, and I think he's hit the money pretty much because. It was a bit of a crystal ball interview. Do you see the tribal influence kind of maybe growing in the future on Vegas, or is this more of a kind of one-off? Where do you see that going?
So I actually wrote in Gambling Insider, it must have been about 4 or 5 years ago now. I wrote a piece on portfolio ownership. It's called The Lessons from Howard Hughes. And I do not believe that that corporations have benefited by owning multiple properties on the Strip to the extent that they have. And what do I mean by that? If you've got a casino with 1,000 rooms and you buy another casino with 1,000 rooms, it doesn't mean you're going to get double the money that you had with the casino with 1,000 rooms. It's not linear in the way that it is with a generic Hilton or another hotel property in other cities. Why? From a strategy point of view, your physical asset is not your strategic asset. Your strategic asset is your customer. So you can have a hut in a middle of nowhere with a roulette wheel and a baccarat table, and if the right customer comes into your hut, you can be very successful or not. So what we do is we create these physical environments to attract the customers that we want to come in. As I said before, they're marketing tools. What the corporations had in the 1980s and 90s, as they grew and went public and were able to attract capital, the easiest way to expand was to acquire your opponent, your opposition, your competitors.
Yeah.
So you ended up with Caesars and MGMs, the two conglomerates, owning all these assets. And with deferred capital and changing in the market and having to try and reinvent and invest in your properties for new customers, which we'll talk about later, it became more and more expensive to keep these things going. So ultimately, at some point, especially with the changes in ownership with opcos and propcos, and you're able to release some of the equity that was within the company for selling off the assets, it made financial sense to sell off these properties. It did not make financial sense anymore to hold them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to exit these properties, who will buy them? Well, the answer is it's either gaming companies that are not in America already, they are hospitality companies that are not in Las Vegas, or there are tribes who are looking to diversify out of their initial holdings.
Yeah.
And Seminoles have been remarkably successful in taking the Hard Rock brand and exploiting it and expanding it and exploiting it across the world. Likewise, you know, you go to other properties, and you've got the San Manuel tribe in California who have bought the Palms, and then you also have out in Virgin, the Mohegan tribe who are operating the casino in there, albeit not the entire hotel, which is another, you know, change in operating strategy and operating models, which one might want to have a look at some point.
Yeah.
But they're not the first, but it certainly won't be the last. And if I, for example, were looking or facing a scenario where powers in Texas are looking to try and, you know, legalize casinos or at least allow one or two casinos in northern Texas or California or Florida, and I were a tribe, say in Oklahoma, I would be looking to diversify. Perhaps in Las Vegas, where there's an established, proven market, and the risks to operate and the regulations to operate and the taxes to operate are much lower than other markets.
So we've dissected Vegas to a large degree, but obviously we can't dissect all of it. And I'm sure in future interviews and future articles, you know, you'll have more to say. But a final question for this interview, and so kind of any overarching messages you'd like to get out there, you know, definitely pack them into this answer. But my question is 2 words for Vegas: the future.
So Las Vegas is a remarkably resilient city, and it has evolved in various cycles. So you have seen the 1950s and the Rat Pack and the Copa era, where it was high-end gambling entertainment for the pre-war generation. Then we built in the 1980s, late 80s, 90s, early 2000s, casino resorts for the boomer generation. If you think about this, the Mirage was opened in '89. The boomer was the average boomer in North America was born in 1950. It would have been 39 when the Mirage opened. So all the way through their 40s, through the mega boom age. Then you get to the business models where it was convention customers during the week and leisure tourists at the weekends. That model stuck, and now we're in this post-COVID world. Me as an advisor, talking to operators, and this is, you know, to casino owners and people in the industry, you're sitting with assets now that were born for the past, that were built for the past generation. If you're a millennial, you were born in 1980, you're now 41, 42. You're not a kid. And I think a lot of the casino industry still sees millennials as flighty or as kids or not interested in gaming. And COVID has taught us that is not the case. And I wrote an academic paper on the next generation of Las Vegas customers about 5 years ago. And one of the key findings in that was that generation would spend money on gaming if they had it, but prefer to spend it on things like food and beverage and nightlife. Well, that customer is now aging out of nightlife, still spending the money on food and beverage, and has a higher disposable income to spend on gaming, and is doing so. And I think for those of us in casino development and operations and management, we need to start looking at that next generation of customer, saying we need to get our assets into shape by reinvesting in them, pivoting the offering to the needs of those customers, rather than just trying to sell them the same stuff like they told their parents.
So in terms of kind of the future of Vegas, for you, that's a key point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if the city is to survive, and it will, you know, we have to start saying, okay, we have to stop, you know, curating all these assets for customers who are in their 60s and 70s, and start looking at customers now who are even in their 20s and 30s. You forget that the Cosmopolitan is now, you know, 11 years old. I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but in when the Cosmopolitan opened compared to 2021, the average age of the customer who comes to Las Vegas has gone down 5 years. It was something like, we talk about customers and trends. It was like 25% of the customers that came to Las Vegas were under the age of 40 in 2010. I would round about that number. Forgive me, I haven't got the data in front of me. But last year, it was 49% were under the age of 40. That is a huge demographic shift in terms of customers coming to Las Vegas. And they're not coming to gamble the way that their parents or grandparents did because of the advent of tribal and regional casinos. So we have to meet those needs. And that involves understanding the strategic asset, your customer, and then developing a physical environment and offering to meet their needs. And that's, what I do, what I spend my days thinking about. I'm trying to convince casino operators that it's where they need to be spending their money.
Absolutely. Well, Oliver, a real pleasure to speak to you. And like I said earlier, I'm sure we'll speak again in interviews, and definitely we'll look forward to reading more of your columns on Gaming America.
Thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your week, and look forward to writing some more cool stuff for you guys in the coming months.
Sounds good. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.